The Struggle in the Chingkang Mountains by Mao Zedong, written November 25, 1928, from The Selected Works of Mao Zedong, Volume 1. This text from Marxist.org. The independent regime in the Henan-Kansai border area in the August defeat. China is the only country in the world today where one or more small areas under red political power have emerged in the midst of a white regime which encircles them. We find on analysis that one reason for this phenomenon lies in the incessant splits and wars within China's comprador and landlord classes. So long as these splits and wars continue, it is possible for an armed, independent regime of workers and peasants to survive and grow. In addition, its survival and growth require the following conditions. 1. A sound mass base. 2. A sound party organization. 3. A fairly strong Red Army. 4. Terrain favorable to military operations. And 5. Economic resources sufficient for sustenance. An independent regime must vary its strategy against the encircling ruling classes, adopting one strategy when the ruling class regime is temporarily stable and another when it is split up. In a period when the ruling classes are split up, as during the wars between Li Songzhen and Tang Shengxi in Henan and Hupo provinces, and between Chang Faku and Li Qishen in Guangdong province, our strategy can be comparatively venturous and the area carved out by military operations can be comparatively large. However, we must take care to lay a solid foundation in the central districts so that we shall have something secure to rely on when the White Terror strikes. In a period when the regime of the ruling classes is comparatively stable, as it was in the southern provinces after April this year, our strategy must be one of gradual advance. In such a period, the worst thing in military affairs is to divide our forces for the adventurous advance, and the worst thing in local work, distributing land, establishing political power, expanding the party, and organizing local armed forces, is to scatter our personnel and neglect to lay a solid foundation in the central districts. The defeats which many small red areas have suffered have been due either to the absence of the requisite objective conditions or to subjective mistakes in tactics. Mistakes in tactics have been made solely because of failure to distinguish clearly between the two kinds of period, that in which the regime of the ruling classes is temporarily stable and that in which it is split up. In a period of temporary stability, some comrades advocated dividing our forces for an adventurous advance, and even proposed leaving the defense of extensive areas to the Red Guards alone, as though oblivious of the fact that the enemy could attack not merely with the landlord's levies, but even in concentrated operations with regular troops. In local work, they utterly neglected to lay a solid foundation in the central districts and attempted unrestricted expansion regardless of whether it was within our capacity. If anyone advocated a policy of gradual advance in military operations, or a policy of concentrating our effort in local work on laying a solid foundation in the central districts so as to secure an invincible position, they dubbed him a conservative. Their wrong ideas were the root cause of the defeat sustained last August by the Henan-Kansai border area and by the 4th Red Army in southern Henan. Our work in the Henan-Kansai border area began in October last year. At the start, all our party organizations in the counties were defunct. The local armed forces consisted only of the two units under Yuan Wang Sai and Wang So in the vicinity of the Chingkang Mountains. Each unit having 60 rifles in bad repair, while the Peasant Self-Defense Corps in the counties of Yongxin, Lianhua, Chaling, and Lingxian have been totally disarmed by the landlord class, and the revolutionary ardor of the masses have been stifled. By February this year, Ningkang, Yongxin, Chaling, and Suishan had county party committees. Lingxian had a special district party committee, and in Lianhua, a party organization was beginning to function and establish connections with the Wenan County Committee. All the counties except Lingxian had a few local armed units, and Ningkang, Chaling, Suishan, and Yongxin, and especially in the latter two counties, there were a good many guerrilla uprisings against the landlords, which aroused the masses, and all were fairly successful. In that period, the agrarian revolution had not yet been carried very far, The organs of political power were called governments of the workers, peasants, and soldiers. Soldiers' committees were set up in the army. When the units went on separate missions, action committees were set up to direct them. The leading body of the party there was the Front Committee, with Mao Zedong as secretary, which had been appointed by the Henan Provincial Committee during the Autumn Harvest Uprising. In early March, upon the request of the Southern Henan Special Committee, the Front Committee was abolished and reorganized as a divisional party committee, with Ho Tingying as secretary, which thus became a body in charge of party organizations in the army only, and without authority over the local party organizations. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong's forces were dispatched to southern Henan upon the request of the special committee there, and consequently the Henan-Kangsai border area was occupied by the enemy for more than a month. At the end of March came the defeat in southern Henan, and in April the forces under Chu Te and those under Mao Zedong, together with the peasant army of southern Henan, withdrew to Chingkang and began to re-establish the independent regime in the border area. From April onward, the independent regime in the Henan-Kangsai border area was confronted with a temporarily stable ruling power in the south, and Henan and Kangsai would dispatch at least 8 or 9 regiments of reactionary forces to suppress us, and sometimes as many as 18. Yet with a force of less than 4 regiments, we fought the enemy for 4 long months, daily enlarging the territory under our independent regime, deepening the agrarian revolution, extending the people's political power, and expanding the Red Army and the Red Guards. This was possible because the policies of the party organizations, local and army, in the border area were correct. The policies of the Border Area Special Committee, with Mao Zedong as secretary, and the Army Committee, with Chen Yi as secretary, of the party were then as follows: struggle absolutely against the enemy, set up political power in the middle section of the Losao mountain range, and oppose flightism, deepen the agrarian revolution in areas under the independent regime, promote the development of the local party organization with the help of the army party organization, and promote the development of the local armed forces with the help of the regular army, be on the defensive against Henan with its comparatively strong ruling power, and take the offensive against Kangsai with its comparatively weak ruling power, devote great efforts to the development of Yongtsin, set up an independent regime of the people there, and prepare for a prolonged struggle. Concentrate the Red Army units in order to fight the enemy confronting them when the time is opportune, and oppose a division of forces so as to avoid being destroyed one by one. Adopt the policy of advancing in a series of waves to expand the area under the independent regime, and oppose the policy of expansion by adventurous advance. Thanks to these proper tactics, to the terrain of the border area which favored our struggle, and to the inadequate coordination between the troops invading from Henan and those invading from Kangsai, we were able to win a number of military victories and expand the people's independent regime in the 4 months from April to July. Although several times stronger than we, the enemy was unable to prevent the expansion of our regime, let alone to destroy it. Our regime tended to exert an ever-growing influence on Henan and Kangsai. The sole reason for the August defeat was that, failing to realize that the period was one of temporary stability for the ruling classes, some comrades adopted a policy suited to a period of splits within the ruling classes, and divided our forces for an adventurous advance on southern Henan, thus causing defeat both in the border area and in southern Henan. Tu Suixing, the representative of the Henan Provincial Committee, and Yang Kaiming, the secretary of the Border Area Special Committee, who had been appointed by the Provincial Committee, failed to grasp the actual situation, and, taking advantage of the fact that Mao Zedong, Wang Xician, and other strongly dissenting comrades are far away in Yongtsin, they disregarded the resolutions of the joint meeting of the Army Committee, the Special Committee, and the Yongtsin County Committee of the party, which disapproved of the views of the Henan Provincial Committee. They just mechanically enforced the order of the Henan Provincial Committee to march to southern Henan and fell in with the desire of the Red Army's 28th Regiment, composed of peasants from Yinchang, to evade struggle and return home, thus causing defeat both in the border area and in southern Henan. Originally, in mid-July, the 8th Army from Henan, under Wu Sheng, had invaded Ningkang, penetrated to Yongtsin, sought battle with us in vain. Our men tried to attack them from a side road, but missed them, and then, being afraid of the masses who supported us, hurriedly retreated to Chaling via Lianhua. In the meantime, the major detachment of the Red Army, which was advancing from Ningkang to attack Lingxian and Chaling, changed its plans on reaching Lingshan and turned towards southern Henan, while the enemy forces from Kangsai, consisting 5 regiments of the 3rd Army under Wang Chun and Qing Hanting, and 6 regiments of the 6th Army under Hu Wantuo, launched a joint assault on Yongtsin. At that point, we had only 1 regiment in Yongtsin which, under the cover provided by the broad masses of the people, pinned down these 11 regiments within a radius of 30 li of Yongtsin County town, for as long as 25 days by means of guerrilla attacks from every direction. In the end, we lost Yongtsin because of the enemy's fierce assault, and also lost Lianhua and Ningkang shortly afterwards. At that moment, internal dissensions suddenly flared up among the Kangsai enemy forces. The 6th Army under Hu Wentuo withdrew in haste and presently engaged Wang Chun's 3rd Army at Changshu. The other 5 Kangsai regiments then hastily withdrew to the county town of Yongtsin. Had our major detachment not moved to southern Henan, it would have been entirely possible to rout this enemy force and extend the area of the independent regime to include Qian, Anfu, and Pingshan, and link up with Pingqiang and Luiyang. But as the major detachment was away, and the 1 remaining regiment was too much exhausted, it was decided that some men should remain to defend the Chingkang Mountains in cooperation with the 2 units under Yuan Wensai and Wang So, and that I should take the rest to Kutang to meet the major detachment and invite it back. By that time, the major detachment was retreating from southern Henan to Kuintang, and on August 23rd, we joined forces there. When the major detachment of the Red Army had arrived in Lingxiang in mid-July, the officers and men of the 29th Regiment, who were wavering politically and wanted to return to their homes in southern Henan, refused to obey orders, while the 8th Regiment was against going to southern Henan and wanted to go to southern Kangsai, but in any case did not want to return to Yongtsin. As Tu Suishing encouraged the 29th Regiment in their mistaken ideas, and the Army Committee failed to dissuade them, the major detachment set out from Lingxiang to Changchao on July 17th. In the engagement with the enemy forces under Fan Shishang and Changchao on July 24th, it was initially successful, but was later defeated and withdrew from the battle. Thereupon, acting on its own, the 29th Regiment hurried homeward to Yichang, with the result that 1 section was annihilated at Lochang by Hu Fenchang's bandits. Another scattered in Changchao Yichang area, and has never been heard of since, and no more than 100 men were mustered again that day. Fortunately, the 28th Regiment, which was the main force, had not suffered great losses, and on August 18th, it occupied Kotong. On August 3rd, the regiment was joined by the troops from the Chingkang Mountains, to which it was decided that the combined forces should return by way of Changyi and Shangyu. When we reached Changyi, Battalion Commander Yuan Chongchuan defected with an infantry company and an artillery company, and though the 2 companies were brought back, our regimental commander Wang Ercho lost his life in this action. When our men were returning, but had not yet reached their destination, enemy units from Henan and Kangsai seized the opportunity to attack the Chingkang Mountains on August 30th. Using their points of vantage, the defending troops, numbering less than 1 battalion, fought back, routed the enemy, and saved the base. The causes of our August defeat were as follows. 1. Some officers and men who were wavering and homesick lost their fighting capacity, while others, who were unwilling to go to southern Henan, were lacking enthusiasm. 2. Our men were exhausted by long marches in the sweltering summer heat. 3. Having ventured several hundred li away from Lingshan, our men lost contact with the border area and became isolated. 4. As the masses in southern Henan had not yet been aroused, the expedition proved to be pure military adventurism. 5. We were uninformed about the enemy situation. And 6. The preparations were inadequate, and officers and men did not understand the purpose of the operation. The current situation in the area under the independent regime. Since April this year, the red areas have been gradually extended. After the Battle of Longyongkao on the borders Yongtsin and Ningkang on June 3rd, in which we defeated the Kangsai enemy forces for the fourth time, the border area reached the peak of its development, embracing the three counties of Ningkang, Yongtsin, and Lianhua, small sections of Qian and Anfu, the northern section of Sichuan, and the southeastern section of Lingxian. In the red areas, a greater part of the land had been distributed, and the remainder was being distributed. Organs of political power were set up everywhere in the districts and townships. County governments were set up in Ningkang, Yongtsin, Lianhua, and Sichuan, and a border area government was formed. Insurrectionary detachments of workers and peasants were organized in the villages, and Red Guards were formed at the district and county levels. In July, the Kangsai enemy forces launched attacks, and in August, the Henan and Kangsai enemy forces jointly attacked the Chingkang Mountains. All the county towns and the plains in the border area were occupied by the enemy. The enemy's jackals, the Peace Preservation Corps, and the landlords' levies ran amok, and white terror raged throughout the towns and countryside. Most of the party and government organizations collapsed. The rich peasants and the opportunists in the party went over to the enemy in great numbers. It was not until the Battle of the Chingkang Mountains was fought on August 3rd that the Henan enemy forces retreated to Lingxian, but that Kangsai forces still held all the county towns and most of the villages. However, the enemy has never been able to recapture the mountain areas, which include the western and northern districts of Ningkang, the Tianlong, Shaoxiqiang, and Wenyanshan districts, in the northern, western, and southern sections of Yongtsin, respectively, the Shaanxi district of Lianhua, the Changkangshan district of Sichuan, and the Xingxingkang and Taoyuan districts of Lingxian. In July and August, in coordination with the Red Guards of the various counties, one regiment of the Red Army fought scores of battles, big and small, losing only 30 rifles before it finally withdrew to the mountains. As our men were marching back to the Chingkang Mountains via Chongyi and Shangyu, the enemy forces from southern Kangsai, the independent 7th Division under Lui Shuyi, pursued us as far as Sichuan. On September 13th, we defeated Lui Shuyi, captured several hundred rifles, and took over the town. On September 6th, we returned to the Chingkang Mountains. On October 1st, at Ningkang, we engaged and defeated one of Shang Shiwi's brigades, commanded by Chou Yongwan, recovering the entire county of Ningkang. Meanwhile, 126 men of the Henan enemy forces under Yan Chengchu, which had been stationed in Kuotong, came over to us and were organized into a special task battalion with Pi Changyun as commander. On November 9th, we routed one regiment of Chou's brigade at Longyongkao, in the county town of Ningkang. On the next day, we advanced and occupied Yongtsin, but withdrew to Ningkang shortly afterwards. At present, our area, extending from the southern slopes of the Chingkang Mountains in Sichuan County in the south to the border of Lianhua County in the north, embraces the whole of Ningkang and parts of Suishan, Lingxian, and Yongtsin, formatting a narrow, unbroken stretch running north to south. The Shaanxi district of Lianhua and the Tianlong and Wanyanshan districts of Yongtsin, however, are not firmly linked with this unbroken stretch. The enemy is attempting to destroy our base area by military attacks and economic blockade, and we are now preparing to defeat his attacks. Military questions. Since the struggle of the border area is exclusively military, both the party and the masses have to be placed on a war footing. How to deal with the enemy, how to fight, has become a central problem in our daily life. An independent regime must be an armed one. Wherever such an area is located, it will be immediately occupied by the enemy if armed forces are lacking or inadequate, or if wrong tactics are used in dealing with the enemy. As the struggle is getting fiercer every day, our problems have become extremely complex and serious. The Red Army in the border area is drawn from 1. Troops formerly under Ye Ting and Hu Long, and Chao Chao and Sua Tao. 2. The Guards Regiment of the former national government at Wuchang. 3. Peasants from Pinkiang and Luiyang. 4. Peasants from southern Henan and workers from Shui Kaoshan. 5. Men captured from the forces under Su Keixiang, Tang Shengqi, Pei Chungxi, Chu Peite, Wu Sheng, and Suang Shiwei. And 6. Peasants from the counties in the border area. However, of the troops formerly commanded by Ye Ting and Hulong, the Guards Regiment and the peasants from Pingyang and Luiyang, only 1/3 is left after more than a year's fighting. Casualties have also been heavy among the peasants from southern Henan. Thus, although the first 4 categories remain the backbone of the 4th Red Army to this day, they are now far outnumbered by the last 2 categories. Furthermore, in the latter, the peasants are outnumbered by the captured soldiers. Without replacement from the source, there would be a serious manpower problem. Even so, the increase in men does not keep pace with the increase in rifles. Rifles are not easily lost, but men are wounded or killed, fall sick or desert, and so are lost more easily. The Henan Provincial Committee has promised to send us workers from Anyang, and we earnestly hope it will do so. As to the class origin, the Red Army consists partly of workers and peasants, and partly of lumpen proletarians. Of course, it is inadvisable to have too many of the latter, but they are able to fight, and as fighting is going on every day with mounting casualties, it is already no easy matter to get replacements even from among them. In these circumstances, the only solution is to intensify political training. The majority of the Red Army soldiers come from the mercenary armies, but their character changes once they are in the Red Army. First of all, the Red Army has abolished the mercenary system, making the men feel they are fighting for themselves and for the people and not for somebody else. So far, the Red Army has no system of regular pay, but issues grain, money for cooking oil, salt, firewood, and vegetables, and a little pocket money. Land has been allotted to all Red Army officers and men who are natives of the border area, but it is rather difficult to allot land to those from other parts of the country. After receiving political education, the Red Army soldiers have become class conscious, learned the essentials of distributing land, setting up political power, arming the workers and peasants, etc. And they know they are fighting for themselves, for the working class and the peasantry. Hence, they can endure the hardships of the bitter struggle without complaint. Each company, battalion, or regiment has its soldiers' committee which represents the interests of the soldiers and carries on political and mass work. Experience has proved that the system of party representatives must not be abolished. The party representative is particularly important at company level, since party branches are organized on a company basis. He has to see that the soldiers' committee carries out political training, to guide the work of the mass movements, and to serve concurrently as the secretary of the party branch. Facts have shown that the better the company party representative, the sounder the company, and that the company commander can hardly play this important political role. As the casualties among the lower cadres are heavy, captured enemy soldiers often become platoon leaders or company commanders in a very short time. Some of those captured in February or March are already battalion commanders. It might seem that since their army is called the Red Army, it could do without party representatives, but this is a gross error. At one time, the 20th Regiment in southern Henan abolished the system, only to restore it later. To rename the party representatives directors would be to confuse them with the directors in the Kuomintang army who are detested by the captured soldiers. A change of name does not affect the nature of the system. Hence, we have decided to make no change. Casualties among party representatives are very heavy, and while we have started classes for training and replenishment, we hope that the Central Committee and the Henan Kangsai Provincial Committees will send us at least 30 comrades who are able to serve as party representatives. Ordinarily, a soldier needs 6 months or a year's training before he can fight, but our soldiers, recruited only yesterday, have to fight today with practically no training. Poor military technique, they fight on courage alone. As long periods of rest and training are out of the question, the only thing to do is to try and avoid certain engagements if possible, and thus gain time for training. We now have a corps of 150 people in training as lower-ranking officers, and we intend to make this course a permanent institution. We hope that the Central Committee and the 2 provincial committees will send us more officers from platoon leader and company commander upwards. The Henan Provincial Committee has asked us to attend to the material conditions of the soldiers and make them at least a little better than those of the average worker or peasant. Actually, they are worse. In addition to grain, each man receives only 5 cents a day for cooking oil, salt, firewood, and vegetables. And even this is hard to keep up. The monthly cost of these items alone amounts to more than 10,000 silver dollars, which is obtained exclusively through expropriation of the local tyrants. We now have cotton padding for winter clothing for the whole army of 5,000 men, but are still short of cloth. Cold as the weather is, many of our men are still wearing only 2 layers of thin clothing. Fortunately, we are inured to hardships. What is more, all of us share the same hardships. From the commander of the army to the cook, everyone lives on the daily food allowance of 5 cents, apart from grain. As for pocket money, everybody gets the same amount, whether it is 20 cents or 40 cents. Consequently, the soldiers have no complaints against anyone. After each engagement, there are some wounded. Also, many officers and men have fallen ill from malnutrition, exposure to cold, or other causes. Our hospitals up in the mountains give both Chinese and Western treatment, but are short of doctors and medicines. At present, they have over 800 patients. The Henan Provincial Committee promised to obtain drugs for us, but so far, we have received none. We still hope the Central Committee and the 2 provincial committees will send us a few doctors with Western training and some iodine. Apart from the role played by the party, the reason why the Red Army has been able to carry on in spite of such poor material conditions and such frequent engagements is its practice of democracy. The officers do not beat the men. Officers and men receive equal treatment. Soldiers are free to hold meetings and to speak out. Trivial formalities have been done away with, and the accounts are open for all to inspect. The soldiers handle the mess arrangements, and out of the daily 5 cents for cooking oil, salt, firewood, and vegetables, they can even save a little for pocket money, amounting to roughly 6 or 7 coppers per person per day, which is called mess savings. All this gives great satisfaction to the soldiers. The newly captured soldiers in particular feel that our army and the Kuomintang army are worlds apart. They feel spiritually liberated, even though material conditions in the Red Army are not equal to those in the White Army. The very soldiers who had no courage in the White Army yesterday are very brave in the Red Army today. Such is the effect of democracy. The Red Army is like a furnace in which all captured soldiers are transmuted the moment they come over. In China, the army needs democracy as much as the people do. Democracy in our army is an important weapon for undermining the feudal mercenary army. The party organization now has 4 levels: the company branch, the battalion committee, the regimental committee, and the army committee. In a company, there is the branch, with a group in each squad. The party branch is organized on a company basis. This is an important reason why the Red Army has been able to carry out such arduous fighting without falling apart. 2 years ago, when we were in the Kuomintang army, our party had no organizational roots among the soldiers. And even among Ye Ting's troops, there was only one party branch to each regiment. That is why we could not stand up to any serious test. In the Red Army today, the ratio of party to non-party people is approximately 1 to 3, or an average of 1 party member in every 4 men. Recently, we decided to recruit more party members among the combat soldiers, so as to attain a 50-50 ratio. At present, the company branches are short of good party secretaries, and we asked the Central Committee to send us a number of activists from among those who can no longer function where they are now. Almost all the cadres from southern Henan are doing party work in the army, but since some of them were scattered during the retreat in southern Henan in August, we now have no people to spare. The local armed forces consist of Red Guards and insurrectionary detachments of workers and peasants. Armed with spears and shotguns, these detachments are organized on a township basis, each township having 1 detachment whose strength varies with the population. Its job is to suppress counter-revolution, protect the township government, and assist the Red Army and Red Guards in battle when the enemy appears. The insurrectionary detachments started in Yongtsin as an underground force, but they have come into the open since we captured the entire county. The organization has now been extended to other counties in the border area, and the name remains unchanged. The arms of the Red Guards are mainly 5-round rifles, but also includes some 9-round and single-round rifles. There are 140 rifles in Chingkang, 220 in Yongsan, 43 in Linhua, so in Chaling, 90 in Longxian, 130 in Sichuan, and 10 in Hunan, making a total of 683. Most of the rifles have been supplied by the Red Army, but a small number were captured from the enemy by the Red Guards themselves. Fighting constantly against the peace preservation corps and levies of the landlords, most of the Red Guards in the counties are steadily increasing their fighting capacity. Before the May 21st incident, all the counties had peasant self-defense corps. There were 300 rifles in Yongsan, 300 in Chaling, 60 in Lingxian, 50 in Sichuan, 80 in Yongsan, 60 in Linhua, 60 in Nanking, and 60 in the Chingkang Mountains. Total 970. After the incident, apart from the rifles in the hands of Yuan's and Wang's men, which remained intact, only 6 rifles were left in Sichuan and 1 in Linhua. All the rest had been seized by the landlords. The peasant self-defense corps were not able to hold on to the rifles as a result of the opportunist line. At present, the Red Guards in the counties still have far too few rifles, fewer than those of the landlords. The Red Army should continue to help with the arms. The Red Army should do everything short of reducing its own fighting capacity to help arm the people. We have laid it down that each battalion of the Red Army should consist of 4 companies, each with 75 rifles, and, counting the rifles of the Special Task Company, Machine Gun Company, Trench Mortar Company, Regimental Headquarters, and the 3 battalion headquarters, each regiment will have 1,075 rifles. Those captured in action should be used as far as possible for arming the local forces. The commanders of the Red Guards should be people who have been sent from the counties to the Red Army training corps and have finished their training. The Red Army should send fewer and fewer people from outside areas to command local forces. Chu Pei-te is arming his Peace Preservation Corps and levies, and the armed forces of the landlords in the border counties are of considerable size and fighting capacity. This makes it all the more urgent to enlarge our local Red forces. The principle for the Red Army is concentration, and that for the Red Guards, dispersion. At the present time, when the reactionary regime is temporarily stable, the enemy can amass huge forces to attack the Red Army, and dispersion would not be to the Red Army's advantage. In our experience, the dispersion of forces has almost always led to defeat, while the concentration of forces to fight a numerically inferior, equal, or slightly superior enemy force has often led to victory. The Central Committee has instructed us to develop guerrilla warfare in much too large an area, extending several thousand li in both length and breadth. This is probably due to an overestimation of our strength, for the Red Guards' dispersion is an advantage, and they are now using this method in their operations in all the counties. The most effective method in propaganda directed at the enemy forces is to release captured soldiers and give the wounded medical treatment. Whenever soldiers, platoon leaders, or company or battalion commanders of the enemy forces are captured, we immediately conduct propaganda among them. They are divided into the wishing to stay and those wishing to leave, and the latter are given traveling expenses and set free. This immediately knocks the bottom out of the enemy's slander that the communist bandits killed everyone on sight. Writing about this measure, the 10-day review, the Journal of Yang Qishen's 9th Division, exclaimed, "How vicious!" The Red Army soldiers showed great concern for the prisoners and arranged warm farewells for them. And at every farewell party for our new brothers, the prisoners respond with speeches of heartfelt gratitude. Medical treatment for the enemy wounded also has a great effect. Clever people on the enemy side, like Li Wenpin, have recently imitated us by stopping the killing of prisoners and by giving medical attention to the wounded. Nevertheless, our men rejoin us at the very next engagement, bringing their arms with them, and this has happened twice already. In addition, we do as much written propaganda as possible, for instance, painting slogans. Wherever we go, we cover the walls with them. But we are short of people who can draw and hope the Central Committee and the 2 provincial committees will send us a few. As for the military bases, the first base, the Chingkang Mountains, is at the juncture of four counties, Ningkang, Lingxian, Sichuan, and Yongtsin. The distance between Maoping on the northern slope in Ningkang County and Honggao on the southern slope in Sichuan is 90 li. The distance between Nashan on the eastern slope in Yongtsin County and Shuikao on the western slope in Ningxian is 80 li. The circumference measures 550 li. In the mountains, there are paddy fields and villages at Big Well, Small Well, Upper Well, Middle Well, Lower Well, Tse-tung, Sichuan, Xingqiao, Caoping, and Lufo. All these places used to be infested by bandits and deserters, but have now been turned into our base area. Its population is under 2,000, and the yield of unhusked rice is less than 10,000 pekels. And so the entire grain for the army has to be supplied from Ningkang, Yongtsin, and Sichuan counties. All the strategic passes in the mountains have been refortified. Our hospitals, bedding, and clothing workshops, ordnance department, and regimental rear offices are all here. At the present moment, grain is being transported to the mountains from Ningkang. Provided we have adequate supplies, the enemy can never break in. The second base, the Chuilong Mountains, is at the juncture of the four counties of Ningkang, Yongtsin, Linhua, and Chaling. It is less important than the Chingkang Mountains, but serves as the rearmost base of the local armed forces of the four counties, and it too has been fortified. It is essential for an independent red regime encircled by the white regime to make use of the strategic advantages offered by mountains. Land questions. The land situation in the border areas. Roughly speaking, more than 60% of the land belonged to the landlords and less than 40% to the peasants. In the Kangsai sector, land ownership was more concentrated in Sichuan County, where about 80% of the land belonged to the landlords. Yongtsin came next with about 70%. In Wenan, Ningkang, and Linhua, there were more owner-peasants, but the landlords still owned the bulk of the fawn, i.e., about 60% of the total, while the peasants owned only 40%. In the Henan sector, about 70% of the land in both Chaling and Ningxian counties belonged to the landlords. The question of the intermediate class. Given this land situation, it is possible to win the support of the majority for the confiscation and redistribution of all the land. The rural population is roughly divided into three classes: the class of big and middle landlords, the intermediate class of small landlords and rich peasants, and the class of middle and poor peasants. The interests of the rich peasants are often interwoven with those of the small landlords. The land of the rich peasants forms only a small percentage of the total. Yet if the land of the small landlords is counted in, the amount is considerable. Probably this is more or less the case throughout the country. The land policy which has been adopted in the border areas is complete confiscation and thorough distribution. Consequently, in the red area, the big and middle landlord class and the intermediate class are being attacked. Such is the policy, but in its actual execution, we have met with a great deal of obstruction from the intermediate class. In the early days of the revolution, the intermediate class ostensibly capitulated to the poor peasant class, but in reality they exploited their traditional social position and clan authority to intimidate the poor peasants for the purpose of delaying the distribution of land. When no further delay was possible, they concealed their actual holdings, or retained the good land and gave up the poor land. In this period, the poor peasants, having long been trampled down and feeling that the victory of the revolution was uncertain, frequently yielded to the intermediate class and dared not take vigorous action. It is taken against the intermediate class in the villages only when the revolution is on the upsurge, for instance, when political power has been seized in one or more counties. The reactionary army has suffered several defeats, and the prowess of the Red Army has been repeatedly demonstrated. The most serious instances of delay in land distribution and concealment of land holdings occurred in the southern section of Yongtsin County, where the intermediate class was the largest. The actual land distribution in this area was carried out only after the Red Army won its great victory at Longyangkao on June 3rd and the district government punished several people for delaying distribution. But as the feudal family system prevails in every county, and as all the families in a village or a group of villages belong to a single clan, it will be quite a long time before people become conscious of their class, and clan sentiment is overcome in the villages. The defection of the intermediate class under the White Terror. Having been under attack during the revolutionary upsurge, the intermediate class deserted to the enemy as soon as the White Terror struck. In Yongtsin and Ningkang, it was precisely the small landlords and rich peasants who led the reactionary troops in setting fire to the houses of revolutionary peasants. On the instructions of the reactionaries, they burned down houses and made arrests, and quite brazenly too. When the Red Army returned to the area of Ningkang, Xinchen, Yongchen, and Longxi, several thousand peasants fled with the reactionaries to Yongtsin, because they were duped by the reactionary propaganda that the communists would kill them. It was only after we had conducted propaganda to the effect that peasants who had defected will not be killed, and peasants who have defected are welcome to come back to reap their crops, that some of them slowly came back. When the revolution is at a low ebb in the country as a whole, the most difficult problem in our areas is to keep firm hold on the intermediate class. The main reason for betrayal by this class is that it has received too heavy a blow from the revolution. But when there is a revolutionary upsurge in the country as a whole, the poor peasant class is something to rely on and becomes bolder, while the interclass is something to fear and dare not get out of hand. When the war between Li Songzhen and Tang Shengqi spread to the small landlords in Chaling, they tried to placate the peasants, and some even sent them pork as a New Year gift, though by then the Red Army had already withdrawn from Chaling to Sichuan. But after the war ended, no one ever heard of such things again. Now that there is a nationwide tide of counter-revolution, the intermediate class in the white areas, having suffered heavy blows, has attached itself almost wholly to the big landlord class, and the poor peasant class has become isolated. This is indeed a very serious problem. The pressure of daily life as a cause of the defection of the intermediate class. The red and the white areas are now facing each other like two countries at war, owing to the tight enemy blockade and to our own mishandling of the petty bourgeoisie. Trade between the two areas has almost entirely ceased. Necessities such as salt, cloth, and medicines are scarce and costly, and agricultural products such as timber, tea, and oil cannot be sent out, so that the peasant's cash income is cut off and the people as a whole are affected. Poor peasants are more able to bear such hardships, but the intermediate class will go over to the big landlord class when it can bear them no longer. Unless the splits and wars within the landlord class and among the warlords in China continue, and unless a nationwide revolutionary situation develops, the small independent red regimes will come under great economic pressure, and it is doubtful whether they will be able to last. For not only is such economic strain intolerable to the intermediate class, but someday it will prove too much even for the workers, poor peasants, and Red Army men. In the counties of Yongtsin and Ningkang, there was at one time no salt for cooking, and supplies of cloth and medicines, not to mention other things, were entirely cut off. Now salt can be had again, but is very expensive. Cloth and medicines are still unobtainable. Timber, tea, and oil, which are all produced abundantly in Ningkang, western Yongtsin, and northern Sichuan, all within our areas at present, cannot be sent out. The criteria for land distribution. The township is taken as a unit for land distribution. In hillier regions with less farmland, for instance, in the Xiaoqiang district of Yongtsin, 3 or 4 townships are sometimes taken as a unit, but such cases are extremely rare. All the inhabitants, men and women, old and young, received equal shares. A change has now been made in accordance with the Central Committee's plan, whereby labor power is taken as a criterion, so that a person with labor power is allotted twice as much land as one without. The question of concessions to the owner. This has not yet been discussed in detail. Among the owner peasants, the rich peasants have requested that productive capacity should be taken as a criterion. That is, that those with more manpower and capital, such as farm implements, should be allotted more land. They feel that neither equal distribution nor distribution according to labor power is to their advantage. They have indicated that they are willing to put in more effort, which, coupled with the use of their capital, would enable them to raise bigger crops. They will not like it if they are allotted the same amount of land as everybody else, and their special efforts and extra capital are ignored, left unused. Land distribution here is still being carried out in the way laid down by the Central Committee, but this question deserves further discussion, and a report will be submitted when conclusions are reached. The land tax. In Chingkang, the tax rate is 20% of the crop, or 5% more than the rate fixed by the Central Committee. It is inadvisable to make any change now, as collection is already underway, but the rate will be reduced next year. Then there are the sections of Sichuan, Linxian, and Yongtsin under our regime, which are all hilly areas, and where the peasants are so poverty-stricken that any taxation is inadvisable. We have to rely on expropriating the local tyrants in the white areas to cover the expenses of the government and the Red Guards. As for the provisioning of the Red Army, rice is obtained for the time being from the land tax in Chingkang, while cash is obtained solely from expropriation of the local tyrants. During our guerrilla operations in Sichuan in October, we collected more than 10,000 yuan, which will last us some time, and we shall see what can be done when it is spent. Questions of political power. People's political power has been established everywhere at county, district, and township levels, but more in name than in reality. In many places there is no council of workers, peasants, and soldiers. The executive committees of the township, district, or even county governments were invariably elected at some kind of mass meeting. But mass meetings called on the spur of the moment can neither discuss questions nor help in training the masses politically. And what is more, they are only too apt to be manipulated by intellectuals or careerists. Some places do have a council, but it is regarded merely as a temporary body for electing the executive committee. Once the election is over, authority is monopolized by the committee and the council is never heard of again. Not that there are no councils of workers, peasants, and soldiers worthy of the name, but they are very few. The reason is the lack of propaganda and education concerning this new political system. The evil feudal practice of arbitrary dictation is so deeply rooted in the minds of the people and even of the ordinary party members that it cannot be swept away at once. When anything crops up, they choose the easy way and have no liking for the bothersome democratic system. Democratic centralism can be widely and effectively practiced in mass organizations only when its efficacy is demonstrated in revolutionary struggle and the masses understand that it is the best means of mobilizing their forces and is of the utmost help in their struggle. We are drafting a detailed organic law for the councils of all levels, based on the outline drawn up by the Central Committee, in order gradually to correct previous mistakes. In the Red Army, conferences of soldiers' representatives are now being established on a permanent basis and at all levels, so as to correct the mistakes of having only soldiers' committees and not conferences. At present, what the masses of the people generally understand by the government of workers, peasants, and soldiers is the executive committee, because they are still unaware of the powers of the council, and think that the executive committee alone is the real power. An executive committee without a council behind it often acts without regard for the views of the masses, and there are instances everywhere of hesitation and compromise on the confiscation and redistribution of land, of squandering or embezzling funds, and of recoiling before the white forces, or fighting only half-heartedly. In addition, the committee seldom meets in full session, all business being decided and handled by its standing committee. In the district and township governments, even the standing committee rarely meets, and business is decided and handled separately by the 4 individuals who work in the office, namely the chairman, secretary, treasurer, and commander of the Red Guards, or insurrectionary detachment. Thus, democratic centralism has not become a regular practice, even in the work of the government. In the early days, the small landlords and rich peasants scrambled to get onto the government committees, especially at the township level. Wearing red ribbons and feigning enthusiasm, they wormed their way into the government committees by trickery and seized control of everything, relegating the poor peasant members to a minor role. They can be cleared out only when they are unmasked in the course of struggle and the poor peasants assert themselves. Though not widespread, such a state of affairs exists in quite a number of places. The party enjoys immense prestige and authority among the masses, the government much less. The reason is that for the sake of convenience, the party handles things directly and brushes aside the government bodies. There are many such instances. In some places, there are no leading party members groups in the government organizations, while in others, they exist but are not functioning properly. From now on, the party must carry out its task of giving leadership to the government, with the exception of propaganda. The party's policies and the measures it recommends must be carried out through the government organizations. The Kuomintang's wrong practice of directly imposing orders on the government must be avoided. Questions of party organization. The struggle against opportunism. It may be said that around the time of the May 21st incident, the party organizations in the border area counties were controlled by opportunists. When the counter-revolution set in, there was very little resolute struggle. In October last year, when the Red Army, the 1st Regiment, the 1st Division of the 1st Army of the Workers' and Peasants' Revolutionary Army, arrived in the border area counties, only a few party members who had gone into hiding were left, and the party organizations had been entirely destroyed by the enemy. The period from last November to April was one of rebuilding the party, and the period since May has been one of great expansion. But in the last 12 months, manifestations of opportunism continue to be widespread. On the approach of the enemy, some members, lacking the will to fight, hid in remote hills, which they called lying in ambush. Other members, though very active, resorted to blind insurrection. These were both expressions of petty bourgeois ideology. After a long period of tempering through struggle and of inter-party education, such things have become less frequent. In the past year, the same petty bourgeois ideology also existed in the Red Army. On the approach of the enemy, either reckless battle or precipitate flight would be proposed. Both ideas emanated from the same individual in the course of the discussions on what military action to take. This opportunist ideology has been gradually corrected through prolonged inter-party struggle and through lessons learned from actual events. For instance, from the losses occurred in reckless battle and the reverses suffered during the precipitate flight. Localism. The economy in the border area is agricultural, with some places still in the age of the hand pestle. In the hilly regions, the wooden pestle is still in general use for husking rice, while in the plains there are many stone pestles. The unit of social organization everywhere is the clan, consisting of people having the same family name. In the party organizations in the villages, it often happens that a branch meeting virtually becomes a clan meeting, since branches consist of members bearing the same family name and living close together. In these circumstances, it is very hard indeed to build a militant Bolshevik party. Such members do not quite understand when they are told that communists draw no sharp line of demarcation between one nation and another, or between one province and another, or that a sharp line should not be drawn between different counties, districts, and townships. Localism exists to a serious extent in the relations between counties and even between districts and townships within the same county. In eliminating localism, reasoning can at best produce only limited results, and it takes white oppression, which is by no means localized, to do much more. For instance, it is only when counter-revolutionary joint suppression campaigns by the two provinces make the people share a common lot in struggle that their localism is gradually broken down. Localism is declining as a result of many such lessons. The question of the native inhabitants and the settlers. There is another peculiar feature in the border counties, namely the rift between the native inhabitants and the settlers. A very wide rift has long existed between the native inhabitants and the settlers whose forefathers came from the north several hundred years ago. Their traditional feuds are deep-seated, and they sometimes erupt in violent clashes. The settlers, numbering several millions, live in a zone extending from the Fujian-Guangdong border all the way along the Hunan-Kangsai border to southern Hubei. These settlers, who live in the hilly regions, have been oppressed by the native inhabitants in the plains, and have never had any political rights. They welcomed the national revolution of the past 2 years, thinking that the day had come for them to raise their heads. But unfortunately, the revolution failed, and they continue to be oppressed by the native inhabitants. Within our own area, the problem of the native inhabitants and the settlers exists in Ningkang, Sichuan, Linxiang, and Chaling. and is most serious in Chingkang. Under the leadership of the Communist Party, the revolutionaries among the native inhabitants of Chingkang, together with the settlers, overthrew the political power of the native landlords and gained control of the whole county in 1926 and 1927. In June last year, the Kangsai government under Chu Pei-tae turned against the revolution. In September, the landlords acted as guides for Chu's troops in the suppression campaign against Chingkang and once again stirred up the conflict between the native inhabitants and the settlers. In theory, this rift ought not to extend into the exploited classes of workers and peasants, much less into the Communist Party, but it does, and it persists by force of long tradition. Here's an example. After the August defeat in the border area, the native landlords returned to Chingkang, bringing with them the reactionary troops, and spreading the rumors that the settlers were going to massacre the native inhabitants. Most of the native peasants defected, put on white ribbons, and guided the white troops in burning down houses and searching the hills. And when the Red Army routed the white troops in October and November, the native peasants fled with the reactionaries, and their property in turn was seized by the settler peasants. This situation, reflected in the party, often leads to senseless conflicts. Our solution is, on the one hand, to announce that peasants who have defected will not be killed, and peasants who have defected will also be given land when they return, in order to help them shake off the influence of the landlords and return home without misgivings. On the other hand, it is to get our county governments to order the restoration by settler peasants of any property they have seized, and to post notices that the native peasants will be protected. Inside the party, education must be intensified to ensure unity between these two sections of the membership. The defection of the careerists. During the revolutionary upsurge in June, many careerists took advantage of the party's open recruitment of members and sneaked into the party, with the result that the membership in the border area rapidly rose to more than 10,000. Since the leaders of the branches and district committees were mostly new members, good inter-party education was out of the question. As soon as the White Terror struck, the careerists defected and acted as guides for the counter-revolutionaries in rounding up our comrades, and the party organizations in the white areas mostly collapsed. After September, the party carried out a drastic house cleaning and set strict class qualifications for membership. All the party organizations in Yongsan and Ningkang counties were dissolved, and re-registration was undertaken. Though greatly reduced in numbers, the membership has gained in fighting capacity. All party organizations used to be in the open, but since September, underground organizations have been built up to prepare the party for carrying on its activities when the reactionaries come. At the same time, we have been making every effort to penetrate into the white areas and operate inside the enemy camp. But in the nearby towns, the foundations have not yet been laid for party organization. The reasons are that, first, the enemy is stronger in the towns, and second, our army hurt the interests of the bourgeoisie too much during its occupation of the towns, so that it is difficult for party members to keep a foothold there. We are now correcting these mistakes, and doing our best to build party organizations in the towns, but so far without much success. The leading bodies of the party. The branch executive has been renamed the branch committee. Above the branch there is the district committee, and above that, the county committee. Where there are special circumstances, a special district committee is formed between the district and the county levels, as for instance, the Peixiang Special District Committee and the Southeastern Special District Committee in Yongsan County. In the border area, there are altogether 5 county committees in Ningkang, Yongsan, Linhua, Sichuan, and Lingxian. There used to be a county committee in Chaling, but as the work there did not take root, most of the organizations formed last winter and this spring have been crushed by the whites. Consequently, for the last 6 months, we have been able to work only in the hilly regions near Ningkang and Yongsan, and so the Chaling County Committee has been changed into a special district committee. Comrades are sent to Yongsan and Anzhen counties, which can be reached only via Chaling, but they have returned without accomplishing anything. The Wannan County Committee was cut off from us by the whites for more than 6 months, after his joint meeting with us in Sichuan in January, and it was not until September, when the Red Army reached Wannan in a guerrilla operation, that we resumed contact. From Wannan, 80 revolutionary peasants returned with our men to the Chingkang Mountains, and were organized as the Wannan Red Guards. There is no party organization in Anfu. The County Committee of Qian, which borders on Yongxian, has gotten in touch with us only twice and has given us no help, which is very strange. In the Shatian area of Tse-tung County, land distribution was carried out on 2 occasions, in March and in August, and placed under the Southern Hunan Special Committee with its center at Shihertung and Lingxi. Above the county committees, there is a special committee of the Hunan-Kangsai border area. On May 20th, the First Party Congress of the border area was held at Maoping in Ningkang County, and it elected 23 people as members of the First Special Committee, with Mao Zedong as secretary. In July, the Henan Provincial Committee sent over Yang Kai-ming, and he became acting secretary. In September, Yang fell ill, and Tan Chenlin took his place. In August, when the major detachment of the Red Army had gone to southern Henan, and the white forces were pressing hard in the border area, we held an emergency meeting at Yongxin. In October, after the Red Army's return to Ningkang, the Second Party Congress of the border area was held at Maoping. In its 3-day session beginning on October 14th, it adopted a number of resolutions, including the political problems and the tasks of the border area party organization, and elected 19 people as members of the Second Special Committee. A standing committee of 5 was formed, with Tan Chenlin, a worker, as secretary, and Chen Chengzhen, an intellectual, as deputy secretary. The Sixth Party Congress of the Red Army was held on November 14th, and it elected an army committee of 23 members, 5 of them forming a standing committee with Chu Te as secretary. Both the Border Area Special Committee and the Army Committee are subordinate to the Front Committee. The Front Committee was reorganized on November 6th, with the following 5 members designated by the Central Committee: Mao Zedong, Chu Te, the secretary of the local party headquarters, Tan Chenlin, a worker comrade, Song Chaosheng, and a peasant comrade, Mao Ko-wen, with Mao Zedong as secretary. For the time being, this committee has set up a secretariat, a propaganda section, an organization section, a labor movement commission, and a military affairs commission. The Front Committee is in charge of the local party organizations. It is necessary to retain the Special Committee because sometimes the Front Committee has to move about with the troops. In our opinion, the question of the proletarian ideological leadership is very important. The party organizations in the border area counties, which are composed almost exclusively of peasants, will go astray without the ideological leadership of the proletariat. Besides paying close attention to the labor movement in the county towns and other big towns, we should increase the workers' representation in the government bodies. The proportion of workers and poor peasants should also be increased in the leading organs of the party at all levels. The question of the character of the revolution. We fully agree with the Communist International's resolution on China. There is no doubt that China is still at the stage of the bourgeois democratic revolution. The program for a thorough democratic revolution in China comprises, externally, the overthrow of imperialism so as to achieve complete national liberation, and internally, the elimination of the power and the influence of the comprador class in the cities, the completion of the agrarian revolution in order to abolish feudal relations in the villages, and the overthrow of the government of the warlords. We must go through such a democratic revolution before we can lay a real foundation for the transition to socialism. In the past year, we have fought in many places, and are keenly aware that the revolutionary tide is on the ebb in the country as a whole. While red political power has been established in a few small areas, in the country as a whole, the people lack the ordinary democratic rights. The workers, the peasants, and even the bourgeois Democrats do not have freedom of speech or assembly, and the worst crime is to join the Communist Party. Wherever the Red Army goes, the masses are cold and aloof, and only after our propaganda do they slowly move into action. Whatever enemy units we face, there are hardly any cases of mutiny or desertion to our side, and we have to fight it out. This holds even for the enemy's Sixth Army, which recruited the greatest number of rebels after the May 21st incident. We have an acute sense of our isolation, which we keep hoping will end. Only by launching a political and economic struggle for democracy, which will also involve the urban petty bourgeoisie, can we turn the revolution to a seething tide that will surge through the country. Up to February this year, we applied our policy towards the petty bourgeoisie fairly well. In March, the representative of the Southern Henan Special Committee arrived in Chingkang and criticized us for having leaned to the right, for having done too little burning and killing, and for having failed to carry out the so-called policy of turning the petty bourgeois into proletarians and then forcing them into the revolution. Whereupon the leadership of the Front Committee was reorganized and the policy was changed. In April, after the whole of our army arrived in the border area, there was still not much burning and killing, but the expropriation of the middle merchants in the towns and the collection of compulsory contributions from the small landlords and rich peasants in the countryside were rigorously enforced. The slogan of all factories to the workers, put forward by the Southern Henan Special Committee, was also given wide publicity. This ultra-left policy of attacking the petty bourgeoisie drove most of them to the side of the landlords, with the result that they put on white ribbons and opposed us. With the gradual change of this policy, the situation has been steadily improving. Good results have been achieved in Sichuan in particular, for the merchants in the county town and other market towns no longer fight shy of us, and quite a few speak well of the Red Army. The fair in Shaolin, held every 3 days at noon, attracts some 20,000 people, an attendance which breaks all previous records. This is proof that our policy is now correct. The landlords imposed very heavy taxes and levies on the people. The pacification guards of Sichuan levied 5 toll charges along the 70 li road from Honggao to Shaolin, no farm produce being exempt. We crushed the pacification guards and abolished these tolls, thus winning the support of all the peasants as well as of the small and middle merchants. The Central Committee wants us to issue a political program which takes into account the interests of the petty bourgeoisie, and we, for our part, propose that the Central Committee work out, for general guidance, a program for the whole democratic revolution which takes into account the workers' interests, the agrarian revolution, and national liberation. A special characteristic of the revolution in China, a country with a predominantly agricultural economy, is the use of military action to develop insurrection. We recommend that the Central Committee should devote great effort to military work. The question of the location of our independent regime. The area stretching from northern Guangdong along the Henan-Kingsai border into southern Hebei lies entirely within the Low Shao mountain range. We have traversed the whole range, and a comparison of its different sections shows that the middle section, with Chingkang as its center, is the most suitable for our armed independent regime. The northern section has terrain which is less suitable for our taking either the offensive or the defensive, and it is too close to the enemy's big political centers. Besides, stationing large forces in the area of Luiyang, Liling, Pingxiang, and Tongku would involve a considerable risk, unless we plan a quick seizure of Changsha or Wuhan. The southern section has better terrain than the northern, but our mass base there is not as good as in the middle section, nor can we exert as great a political influence on Henan and Kangsai from it as we can from the middle section, from which any move can affect the lower river valleys of the 2 provinces. The middle section has the following advantages. 1. A mass base, which we have been cultivating for more than a year. 2. A fairly good basis for the party organizations. 3. Local armed forces which have been built up for more than a year and are well experienced in struggle, a rare achievement, and which, coupled with the 4th Red Army, will prove indestructible in the face of any enemy force. 4. An excellent military base, the Chingkang Mountains, and bases for our local armed forces in all the counties. And 5. The influence it can exert on the 2 provinces and on the lower valleys of the rivers, an influence endowing it with much more political importance than that possessed by southern Henan or southern Kangsai, the influence of either of which can reach out only to its own province, or only to the upper river valley and the hinterland of its own province. The disadvantage of the middle section is that, since it has long been under the independent regime and is confronted by the enemy's large encirclement and suppression forces, its economic problems, especially the shortage of cash, are extremely difficult. As for a plan of action here, the Henan Provincial Committee advocated 3 different plans within a few weeks in June and July. First, Yuan Taishen came and approved our plan to establish political power in the middle section of the Lao Shao mountain range. Then 2, Sui Qing and Ye Kaiming came and urged that the Red Army should move towards southern Henan without the least hesitation and leave a force of only 200 rifles behind to defend the border area together with the Red Guards. This, they said, was the absolutely correct policy. The third time, barely 10 days later, Yuan Taisheng came again with a letter which, besides rebuking us at great length, urged the Red Army should set out for eastern Henan. This was again described as the absolutely correct policy, to be carried out without the least hesitation. These rigid directives put us in a real dilemma, because failure to comply would be tantamount to disobedience, while compliance would mean certain defeat. When the second message came, the Army Committee, the Border Area Special Committee, and the Yongsan County Committee of the party met in a joint session and decided against carrying out the provincial committee's instructions, as it was considered dangerous to move towards southern Henan. But a few days later, Tu Suiqing and Yang Kaiming, persisting in the provincial party committee's plan and taking advantage of the 29th Regiment's homesickness, dragged the Red Army off to attack the county town of Changchao, thus bringing defeat both to the border area and to the Red Army. The Red Army lost about half its men, and countless houses were burned down and innumerable people massacred in the border area. County after county fell to the enemy, and some of them have not been recovered to this day. As for moving to eastern Henan, it was certainly inadvisable for the main forces of the Red Army to do so unless there was a split among the ruling landlords of Henan, Hubei, and Kangsai provinces. If we had not advanced on southern Henan in July, we would not only have averted the August defeat in the border area, but we could also have exploited the fighting between the Kuomintang Sixth Army and Wang Cheng's Kuomintang forces in Changsha, Kangsai province, to crush the enemy forces in Yongsan, overrun Qian, and Anfu, and make it possible for our advance guard to reach Pingshan and establish contact with the 5th Red Army in the northern section of the Laoshao mountain range. Even if all that had happened, the proper place for our general headquarters should have still been Ningkang, and only guerrilla forces should have been dispatched to eastern Henan. Since fighting had not broken out among the landlords, and since formidable enemy forces were still in Pingshan, Chaling, and Yongxian on the Henan border, we would have been giving the enemy his chance if we had moved our main forces northward. The Central Committee asked us to consider an advance on eastern or on southern Henan, but either course is very dangerous. Although the proposed expedition to eastern Henan has not been carried out, the expedition to southern Henan has proved a failure. This painful experience is always worth remembering. We are not yet in a period when the regime of the landlord class is split up, and the suppression forces of the enemy deployed around the border area still number more than 10 regiments. But if we can continue to find ways of getting cash, food and clothing no longer being a big problem, then, with the foundation of our work established in the border area, we shall be able to cope with these enemy forces, and even with larger ones. As far as the border area is concerned, it would at once suffer devastation, just as it did in August, if the Red Army moved away. Although not all our Red Guards would be wiped out, the party and our mass base would receive a crippling blow, and while there are places in the mountains where we might retain a foothold, in the plains we would all have to go underground as in August and September. If the Red Army does not move away, then, building on the foundations we already have, we shall be able to gradually expand to surrounding areas, and our prospects will be very bright. If we want to enlarge the Red Army, the only way is to engage the enemy in a prolonged struggle in the vicinity of the Chingkang Mountains, where we have a good mass base, namely in the counties of Ningkang, Yongsan, Lingxian, and Sichuan, utilizing in this struggle the divergence of interest between the enemy forces of Henan and Kangsai provinces, their need to defend themselves on all sides, and their consequent inability to concentrate their forces. We can gradually enlarge the Red Army by the use of correct tactics, fighting no battles unless we can win it, and capture arms and men. With the preparatory work that had already been done among the masses in the border area between April and July, the Red Army could undoubtedly have been enlarged in August, had its major detachment not made its expedition to southern Henan. Despite that mistake, the Red Army has returned to the border area, but the terrain is favorable, and the people are friendly, and the prospects are not bad even now. Only through the determination to fight and stamina in fighting in places such as the border area can the Red Army add to its arms and train up good men. The red flag has been kept flying in the border area for a whole year. It has incurred the bitter hatred of the landlord class in Henan, Hubei, and Kansai, and indeed of that of the whole country. But it is steadily raising the hopes of the workers, peasants, and soldiers in the surrounding provinces. Consider the soldiers. Because the warlords are making the bandit suppression campaign against the border area their major task, and are issuing such statements as, "A year has been spent and $1 million used up in the effort to suppress the bandits," or "The Red Army has 20,000 men with 5,000 rifles," the attention of their soldiers and disheartened junior officers is gradually turned towards us, and more of them will break away from the enemy to join our ranks, thus providing the Red Army with another source of recruitment. Besides, the fact that the red flag has never been lowered in the border area shows at once the strength of the Communist Party and the bankruptcy of the ruling classes, and this is of nationwide political significance. Therefore, we hold, as we have always held, that it is absolutely necessary and correct to build up and expand red political power in the middle section of the Lo Xiao mountain range.